In our countdown during the month of Elul towards Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have our daily middah. Now, I've been told I'm supposed to speak here for a minute or so, which is very hard for a rabbi to do. But the middah, the element that we should be focusing on in our preparation, our spiritual preparation for the day that I'd like to talk about is generosity. And I want to suggest to you that why be generous in the end? I mean, you know, there might be utilitarian reasons that are beneficial to you to be generous to another person. Maybe you'll think that that other person will somehow and someday do good for you and reciprocate. And even the idea that it makes you feel good and that it is itself is a utilitarian thing, that might guide you towards being generous and towards the value of generosity. And if you end up doing the right thing, then to a certain degree from a Jewish perspective, your motivations are secondary anyway. But I think that the fundamental value, the premise, the religious premise of generosity rests on the assumption of both you and I, all human beings, are created in the divine image. We carry the spark of the divine in us, and therefore to trample on the human being, to trample on human dignity, is in a certain sense to trample on God. And therefore to see somebody who is in need, and that need is unattended, and you can provide for that person and you don't, is in a certain sense to disrespect God. Because if you and I were created in the image of God, we have equal standing in the sight of God. And I think that's an important message for us to bear in mind, not only in our spiritual preparation towards the High Holy Days, but also given the atmosphere of the world and given the atmosphere of our country that is so callous and often so brutal. And just events recently with respect to immigration, really just basically cruel. That this idea, this notion of generosity, is not simply a question of feeding an immediate impulse. It's a question of doing right, doing justice in the sight of God. I would add one more element that from a Jewish perspective, as I mentioned before, we do care about your motivations. It's the outcome, it's the deed that we care most about. And therefore we have a concept that's related to generosity in Judaism called Sadaqa. It's really an untranslatable term because it's rooted in the word tzedek, which means justice. The idea of doing tzedakah, giving tzedakah in Judaism, is connected to generosity, but it implies you have an obligation. You have this obligation because by virtue of the fact that you're human, and the person who needs tzedakah is human. So I want to wish you in advance a Shana Tova Umetuka, a sweet and joyous new year. And may we be signed and sealed this year in the Book of Life.